Characters are an integral part to any form of storytelling, and video games are no exception. As games have evolved throughout the years, the characters in the games have gotten better, with some being equally as, if not more iconic than the home games. However, one type of character has remained rather unchanged: main characters. While some of them are full-fledged three-dimensional characters, there are a handful who have remained silent, a very strange trope that I've decided to look at today, to understand why it exists and how it can be executed well. I've got 4 examples for analysis, so let's hop straight into a look at silent protagonists in video games. Oh yeah, also, funny graphs is looking pretty off balance, so let's try to fix it. Okay, yeah. So the 4 I'm looking at today can be divided into 4 categories based on how well they work: neutral, good, bad, and just kinda weird. I'm just gonna start by looking at who I consider to be the true neutral silent protagonists: Link. Ever since Zelda 1, Link has been a flagship for the strong silent type, and even as the Zelda series evolved, Link has stayed mostly the same. Link doesn't really do anything right, but he also doesn't really do anything wrong per se. He has all the ups and downs of a silent protagonist, and essentially a template for everyone I'll be looking at, so let's look at some attributes. The main draw of a silent protagonist is acting as a vessel for the player, giving them the experience of being the one going on an epic quest. The best thing to help this is giving the player choices. If they have the freedom to decide what they want to do in the game, it helps to immerse the player as much as possible, which is aided by a stoic main character. Link best fills this role in the Zelda games where more freedom is given, and it's probably the reason why Nintendo decided to make him silent in the first place, considering Zelda 1 was entirely open world. And with Link Between Worlds and especially Breath of the Wild returning freedom to the player, it makes Link work just as good as a vessel as he did then. Unfortunately, when the player doesn't have freedom, Link suffers from the fault of the silent protagonist. When freedom is taken away from the player, Link just becomes a wall that NPCs monologue to, which showcases their characters really well, but not Link's. In the more linear Zelda games, having Link being silent hinders him a considerable amount. The more Link is spoken to and told directly where to go, the more he strays away from being a vessel for the player and becoming his own character. But unfortunately, since he's dead silent, he can't really stand on his own, and as such falls flat as a character. But due to the way the Zelda series is structured, there are a fair amount of times when you have full control over Link, with the freedom of choice, during which times his zip lips are quite beneficial. So Link's quality depends on the exact Zelda game you choose, but all in all, he's a pretty all-around protag, and is more or less a comparison for everyone else. Anyways, let's move on to the best way to do a silent protagonist that I've seen. Everything I just talked about involving the quiet guys, being a vessel, freedom of choice, etc., is basically personified in one fine gent: Gordon Freeman, specifically in Half-Life 1. You see, Gordon is set up as basically nothing. All the information given about him is the most bare-bones stuff: age, college, PhD, but nothing actually about Gordon. This is really nice, since it means the player can fill in the gaps however they want. Well, that's just the start. Half-Life, and especially its sequel, are famous for never taking control away from the player. Even in the cutscenes, save one, you have full control over Gordon, so it's up to you how he interacts with his fellow scientists. While I could be listening closely to every word they have to say, he also just waltz around and not pay attention to anything they say, which ultimately leads to what makes Gordon so good. He has something no one else I've seen does, or rather he lacks something: a moral compass. Gordon's lack of a moral compass is what really makes him shine. Due to the way Half-Life 1 works, you, in control of him, have control over basically everything about him, especially how good of a person he is. He could be a true nobleman, trying to save everyone on his quest to shut down the Residence Cascade. Or he could be a cruel killer who should never have his hands on a weapon, on his quest to kill everyone while trying to get out Black Mesa for good. It's the amount of freedom that you're given in Half-Life that makes Gordon work so well as a vessel for the player. I mean, even the finale of the game is making a grand choice that's entirely up to the player. In the sequel, Gordon isn't as good of a silent protagonist. Due to the game's linear structure, a lot of the choices given in Half-Life 1 is removed from you, especially the moral compass. You're now fighting against the Combine for the Resistance no matter what. It can't even kill friendly NPCs anymore. All this works better for the way Half-Life 2 is made. Looking at Gordon himself, he's best implemented in the original. I know that a lot of the points I made about Freeman aren't unique to him. A lot of Western RPGs have silent protagonists that give you the freedom to choose whether they're good or evil, but I just felt that Gordon was the best example, and also haven't played many Western RPGs yet. Anyways, now that we've seen how to do it right, let's move on to how to do it right-ish, but also kinda wrong. Whatever, next segment. Fire Emblem 3 Houses is a very character-focused game. Each character has motivations, goals, and it's pretty fleshed out. For the most part. Among the colorful cast of characters, Byleth sticks out like a sore thumb. There's a lot to debunk with this guy, so I'll start with what works. For starters, the game is all about big choices that you have control over, so one of the first things you do is choose a house to support and teach, which has huge consequences later on in the story. That's pretty nice, and all the other freedom you're given in teaching your students in 3 Houses helps to elevate this. However, that's not what makes Byleth work so well as a silent protagonist. The thing that works best is something sort of similar to what made Freeman work so well: their lack of a background. Whereas with Gordon, it was just an irrelevant thing left for you to fill in. Byleth's origin is brought up quite frequently, but nobody knows anything about the guy. Hell, they don't even know anything about themselves. This adds something that goes hand in hand with the silent protagonist: mystery. It's really interesting to see various people interact with Byleth, try to piece together who they are and where they come from, and gradually getting everything together, and it's really engaging. Having some mysterious, all-powerful hero who slays everything without uttering a word is pretty cool, and it's definitely the best part of the Ashen Demon. But sadly, that's only one side of Byleth. On the other side, you have the mute professor, who just isn't a very interesting character on their own. The best place to take an example of this is definitely supports. You see, support conversations are supposed to be just that, conversations. But with Byleth supports, it's more or less just a character monologuing about whatever to Byleth while they just interject with the most cookie cutter questions or responses every now and again. While it does a great job of showing off how good the student or whoever is as a character, it doesn't do anything for Byleth themselves, and really just makes it apparent how nothing they are. But if you're really lucky, you might get one of their classic lines of ... Oh, now that's a good one. Now, Byleth isn't actually truly silent. During battles, they talk as much as a normal character, with selection lines, victory lines, and whatnot. And it seems that all these have about a 1 in 2 chance of being an incredibly mundane line that shows off how boring they are, or a truly fantastic quote that really shows off the better half of them. And on that note, in 3 Houses anyways, I much prefer the design of male Byleth. His smaller eyes and more neutral expression make him look much more mysterious and secretive, while female Byleth's larger eyes and slight smile make her look more like anyone else. All in all, Byleth is a very hard character to design my feelings on, since they simultaneously succeed and don't at being a silent protagonist. But overall, the fail starts as a very good example of how you can and can't pull off the trope well. Speaking of not pulling it off well, let's move on to the last person that we're going to be looking at today. Dragon Quest is a series that has kept a very similar formula since first entry in 1984. I'll work in favor of the series most of the time, it also does work against it quite often, and believe it or not, one of those traditions is the silent hero. Ever since Dragon Quest 1... Hey, wait a minute. Ever since Dragon Quest 2, the hero has been a nameless, speechless do-gooder that you have control over. All it worked fine in the 80s, back when it was uncommon for people to have more than 2 lines of dialogue. As time progressed and games evolved, it's become gradually hard to make the hero measure up to the rest of the cast, and nowhere is that more apparent than the most recent entry in the series, Dragon Quest XI. The hero of this game is, simply put, a disaster. Let's get into why. Hero, aka 11, aka Luminary, is everything wrong with the silent protagonist build, for a variety of reasons. Firstly, Dragon Quest XI is an extremely linear game, giving the player very little room for choice, at least until Act 3. This leaves little room for the player to take role of the protag, which is one of the biggest upsides of having a silent protagonist, but I've already talked about that quite a bit, and besides, it's small beans compared to some of Luminary's other problems. The first of the huge problems with Luminary comes with his story relevance. Pretty much the entire plot of the game, and everything interesting in it, revolves around this guy, but the problem is there's nothing really interesting about him. Let's compare him to Byleth real fast, since the two are rather similar. Byleth is also super relevant to the story, but there are 2 big differences. Firstly, the entire plot doesn't revolve around them. In fact, they're more of a secondary protector to the chosen house leader. And second, Byleth's mysterious past keeps him at least a slight bit interesting during the plot. Looking at Luminary again, the plot is all about him and rarely deviates to anyone else. And even if it does, it's typically just for a few hours of the game. And while 11 does have a bit of mystery revolving around his heritage as a Luminary, it's nothing compared to the Ashen Demon. And even then, it's all explained during Act 1, so after that, the Luminary doesn't really have much to go off of. But somehow, Luminary's story relevance isn't even his worst crime as a silent protagonist. The hero's biggest error is that his quietness actively detriments Dragon Quest XI, just putting it bluntly. There are countless examples of this throughout the game, but I've got some pretty good ones I want to look at. Firstly, Toggles. Toggles are these small creatures that are related to the flow of time in various ways, and only Luminary can see them. However, being the dolt that he is, from the time he first sees them to the time he goes to Toggles' hometown, he doesn't tell anyone about them. Like, sure, it might seem weird for him to mention to his party mates that he's talking to a small creature that they can't see, but considering some of the other stuff that's happened by that point, it wouldn't be too out of the ordinary, and it would certainly look better than him just talking to an invisible creature. But the single best example to show how bad of a character Luminary is takes place during a few hours into the game. Even though it's a really good scene, so I'll just throw up a timestamp if you want to play the game for yourself. Alright, now that you've all been filtered out, I'm looking at the scene that plays out when you return from Heliodor. While there, you are labeled as the Forbidden Darkspawn, and the knights are sent out to reward your village. After escaping from the dungeon, you return to Cobblestone, and are thrust into a very strange segment. You meet with your mom, except she doesn't recognize you, even after you say you're her son. You go down to the water to meet your long-dead grandfather, and save your much younger best friend, Scarf. After that, the Luminary realizes something's wrong, and snaps back to reality, where he sees that his home village has been burned down in a vicious act against the supposed Darkspawn. Now this is a tragic event that would emotionally scar any reasonable person, and justifiably so. So how does the Luminary react to this? Well, he doesn't. This is the absolute perfect opportunity to show any amount of character for the hero, but Square decided not to do anything with it, and just keep him dead sad. The guy doesn't even cry or anything, he just looks sad for a bit and then moves on to his next task. The missed potential here is absolutely infuriating. An opportunity to finally have a Dragon Quest hero with any emotional depth is being served on a silver platter. But alas, gotta keep those traditions, right? Well, not really. Because there is one thing I didn't mention about the flashback part. Along with your mom, grandpa, and best friend, there's one other character you see during the flashback/vision, that being the hero. But here's the thing, this idiot talks.
Hey Grandad, can I borrow your ladder?
So this guy is entirely capable of speech, and he has done in the past, but he just doesn't for no goddamn reason in the present. But hey, maybe it's just a weird vision where things aren't as they really are, right? Wrong. There's also a 100% real flashback later in the game where young Lunar gets to talk in his extra Scottish accent again. This scene, along with the toggles, the story relevance, and the lack of room as vessel, are why I deem Luminary from Dragon Quest XI the worst example of a silent protagonist I have ever seen. Now, obviously, that's not every silent protagonist in existence. There are countless other guys I could have talked about, but I only had a certain amount of time before this video started to drag, and the 4 I covered all my bases pretty well. With that said, I'd be interested to hear some of your thoughts about the silent protagonist trope, and some good or bad examples of how it can be done, so feel free to list those in the comments, I'm genuinely interested. Also, maybe consider subscribing, that's a rather small thing to do if I do this to myself. And with that said, I will see you all next time.